This is a review of the Minolta X-700, a model introduced in 1981 as Minolta's top spec model. It was produced until 1999, an incredible 18 years.
I'm going to go over the controls of the camera, talk a little bit about its history and my history with it. Then I'll talk about my likes and dislikes.
We're going to start off on the top plate right side where you're going to find the frame advance lever, the frame counter window, the safe load signal window, a lock for the P and A positions on the shutter speed, the main switch position indicator, the shutter speed dial, and finally the shutter release. The shutter speed dial has settings for bulb, 1 second, 1/2 second through 1/1000th of a second, aperture priority, and program mode. The red 60 on the dial indicates the maximum flash synchronization speed is 1/60th of a second. Moving to the left side, you have the film rewind lever, the film speed dial, the exposure compensation dial, and the exposure compensation lock. Moving to the front plate right side, you have a control which when pressed up is the self-timer function and when pressed down is the auto exposure lock. Below that is an LED for the self-timer function, and below that is the flash synchronization terminal. To the left is a really nice handle. Moving to the left side, you have the lens release button, the shutter release socket, and the depth of field preview button. Looking at the back plate, you see a memo holder and a nice thumb grip. Looking at the bottom plate left to right, you have the motor drive coupler, the lens release button, the tripod socket, the battery door, and the motor drive contacts. Looking in the viewfinder straight ahead, you see the focusing screen, and bottom center, you see the aperture. The metering information is on the right with indicators for manual mode, aperture priority, and program mode. In manual mode, you see an M at the top of the meter and a LED lit beside the shutter speed that the camera thinks you should be at. Unfortunately, you do not see the tick beside the shutter speed that the camera is actually at. In aperture priority mode, you see an A lit up at the top of the meter, and the LED is lit up beside the shutter speed that the camera is going to choose for you. And in program mode, you see a flashing P at the top of the meter and an LED lit beside the shutter speed that the camera is picking for you. Unfortunately, you don't see what aperture the camera is picking for you.
This was Minolta's most popular camera through the 80s. They threw a lot of features at the camera to appeal to a really wide audience. For instance, it had multiple data backs, it had multiple focusing screens, it had 2 different motor drives, many flash units, and even an infrared controller. The X700 ticks most of the boxes for features that photographers want. For instance, it's got the AE lock button, the depth of field preview button, as well as a full information viewfinder when you're in manual mode. I'll talk about that a little more in a little bit. It's also got aperture priority, which is the way I prefer to shoot my cameras that have that. So you choose the aperture, the camera shows you what shutter speed it's picking, and then you can take the picture really quickly. It also has stepless shutter speed, meaning that the camera, if it needs to pick a shutter speed something between 1000 and 500, which are available on the dial, it will do that if you're in aperture priority mode. So you pick an aperture, the camera decides that it needs a shutter speed that's not available on the dial because it's between one of the options. It'll just pick that one because it can, right, with the electronics in the camera. So that's very nice. This is really one of my favorite cameras. It's a great looking camera. It's got all the functions you would want on it as a photographer. It's pleasant to hold and to shoot with. The model was used as a basis for 2 other models, the 500/570 and the 300/370. Those models were lesser expensive models and somewhat lesser featured than the X700, but they actually excelled at a couple things. Both the 570 and the 370 fix the problem that this camera has where you can't see in the viewfinder what shutter speed you've actually picked. On this camera, it only shows you what the shutter speed is you should have to keep the meter happy. The 370 and 300 370 and 500 570, they have a little blinking indicator where you're currently set, and then they have a solid indicator with the shutter speed that you should be at. So you can sort of line them up and then you have the proper focus. With the X700, you only have the solidly lit LED beside the shutter speed you should be at, and you have to take your eye away and look down to see what you're actually at. Not a huge deal, but it's actually nicer on the 370 and the 570s, so you might look at one of those. The 370 does not have a program mode, and I don't think the 570 does either, but I believe they both have aperture priority mode and manual, of course. Now for a couple things I don't love about this camera, and somewhat nitpicky, because I said before I love the way this camera looks. I think it's a great looking camera and a great handling camera. The body is plastic, so to keep costs down, everything's plastic. So it doesn't feel cheap like some of my cameras do. It's got some heft to it, and it's great in the hand, especially with this grip, this hand grip, but it's plastic. My first exposure to the X-700 was in college when I was working at the newspaper. Our newspaper camera was this camera, and we had the flash units, we had the motor drive, the motor drive 1 I think it was. I'll have to put a picture up of that. It is awesome. And I don't know if we had the remote control thing or not, but I think we did have the one that you use through this port, whichever one that is. But it was a great camera. We used it day in and day out, from 86 through 88, and then I got my Nikon 8008. So, but this one, we still used it. It was a great camera, not this actual one. This camera is actually my wife's camera. She got it as a graduation gift from her mother from graduation of high school. And we still have it, and it still shoots wonderfully. It's a really great camera, and I recommend it. Thanks for watching my video, and if you liked it, hit the like button and think about subscribing. Also, if you have some ideas for other videos you'd like me to make, leave some comments down below. Thanks again. The X-700 ticks the boxes. That doesn't sound right. The X-700 ticks most of the boxes for features that photographers like. Ticks most of the boxes. Minolta incorporated a lot of features to appeal to the widest possible audience it could, even professionals. No, that's not what I want to say.